And good luck.
Welcome, and this is a public meeting of the Indiana Arts Commission. Today, we are reviewing On-Ramp 2021 local fellowship proposals for Floyd County's cohort. I am Paige Sharp, and I'm Deputy Director of the Indiana Arts Commission. Today is Wednesday, October 20th, and it's 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The panelists are meeting on Zoom, and the public is observing on YouTube. At this time, I would like the panelists and staff to introduce themselves, stating their name, occupation, and where they are currently located. And I will introduce them by name. We're going to start with Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Salazar, the clarinet guy. I'm a clarinetist and composer, and the Director of Community Engagement and Artist Services with Classical Music Indy, and I'm at home in Brownsburg, Indiana.
Great, thank you, Eric. Ellen? Oh, we can't hear you, Ellen.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
All right, great. Good morning. My name is Ellen Rempala. I'm a library media specialist, also known as a school librarian, up in Westville, Indiana.
Great, thank you, Ellen. Jenny?
Hi all, I'm Jenny DiBenedito. I'm a graphic designer by day and ceramicist and enamelist and public artist all the other times. I was in Jeffersonville, Indiana for 6 years, but just a few months ago relocated to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but hope to be back in Indiana in a few years.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Holly-Ann?
I am Holly-Ann Mitchell. I'm a jewelry designer here in Indianapolis, and I actually make jewelry out of recycled newspaper. So different sections of the newspaper, comic strips, crosswords, you name it. I use it to make jewelry as well as wall tapestries.
Great, thank you. Michael?
Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Dain. I'm an emeritus professor of theater education and directing at Ball State University. I used to be the artistic director for a theater company in Indianapolis called the Funhouse Players, and I'm the co-creator of the PRISM project, which incorporates the use of the arts with students on the autism spectrum.
Great, thank you, Michael. Kristen?
Hi everyone, my name is Kristen Chuang. I am the Director of Communications and Marketing for the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design down at IU Bloomington. I also have had a side freelance practice doing design work for about 10 years, and yeah, excited to be here today.
Great, thank you, Kristen. And staff, share your name, occupation, and where you're from and your role here today. And we'll start with Ailey.
Hi everyone, I'm Ailey McGill. I'm the Executive Director of Nickel Plate Arts, which is based in Noblesville, Indiana and serves Hamilton County. And I'm also the Fellowship Manager for the Floyd County cohort. So I've been helping support applicants as well as panelists throughout this process.
Thank you, Ailey. Chapin?
Hey there, I'm Chapin Schnick. I'm the Contracts Operations and IT Assistant for the Arts Commission, and I'm here in a tech role today.
Great, thank you, Chapin. So this panel is designed to gather feedback that will help the applicants strengthen their fellowship project to advance their creative career. The discussion will also help IAC staff identify any important modifications applicants may be required to make to their fellowship project before moving forward. I will announce the application we will review and then ask the first reader to begin the discussion. The first reader will provide advice to strengthen the fellowship project, focusing on the evaluation criteria from their perspective. Panelists, please note that the applications do not need to be recapped since everyone has read it. Just provide your comments. After the first reader is finished, I will then ask the second reader to present any new additional or differing comments. We are not looking for consensus. We just want the applicant to receive excellent advice from the different perspectives that panelists bring to the table. After the second reader is finished, I'll open up the discussion for final comments for the rest of the panel. And remember, in the interest of time, we'll only be looking for new, additional, or differing viewpoints. And if a panelist has a conflict of interest, That individual will be placed in the virtual waiting room while that application is discussed. And finally, once the application has been discussed by the full panel, we ask the panel if they'd like to update any of the comments in the online system. And if they don't, we'll just move on to the next application. And unless we have any questions from our panelists, then we are ready to get started. And the first application that we're starting with is Angie and Andriot. And Eric, you are the first reader.
All right. So I just want to start by saying that the goals of this proposal are very clear. And I want to give credit that the artistic outcome is measurable. 12 paintings, that's very specific, helps me understand when we know that the project is complete. I do want to make note that there was something in the goals section that I needed a bit more clarity on, and it was language about my first real art exhibit. And being a musician, I don't have a clear sense of what that looks like. So I'd encourage you to include more details of what that looks like. And in my eyes, you're a professional already, so I'm not sure that it was necessary to say my first real one, because you seem professional to me. All right, and in terms of the feasibility of the project, again, it's clear, we've got a plan, and I appreciate it as well that in your budget, you built it based off of the estimation of your lowest tier commission fee. I appreciate the conservative planning in that, and then, you know, if you sell more from your upper tier, then that is good for you, but that gives me confidence that this budget is going to remain balanced. I did have a question about the Nerd Brands marketing, and my only comment on it is that it's super sweet that you're going to get that in kind, but it sort of came out of the blue, like suddenly appearing in the budget as a line item, and I didn't see any language prior to that in the previous sections. So I'd like personally a bit more clarity on your relationship with that agency. I like that you're getting it in kind. That's great, good for you. I just want to make sure that it's gonna happen, and it was just very sudden to me, which made me a little uncomfortable. All right, and moving on to community engagement, I really love that you are going to the community, literally conversing with these 4 women about their story and making the art based on those conversations. That is terrific community engagement. So really nice work on that. I did notice that, well, I would say that to strengthen the application further, I think it's very strong community engagement, because you're going to the people and creating the art based on those conversations. I'd encourage you to think about what the lasting impact of these paintings is going to be. So there's language about how you're going to do that community engagement. I'd encourage you to think through, so once the paintings are out in the world, is there going to be further interaction with them, and how will that impact the community? Overall, I think this is a strong proposal, and thank you. That's what I have to say about this one.
Great, thank you, Eric. And our second reader is Ellen.
All right, good morning. I agree with a lot of what Eric said as far as the goals go. I thought the artist did a wonderful job of describing both project goals and the long-term creative career goals. I was able to very clearly see how this project is going to help the artist progress towards the career goals. With feasibility, the budget seemed very realistic to me. All details connected and made sense with the timeline, which also looked really good. And then with community engagement, I just saw just a lot of mutual benefits there, which was awesome. So the artist is working with other artists, a local business was involved, and then the 4 women subjects, just like I said, mutual benefits all around. And I definitely think investing in all of these different relationships will help the artist reach that goal, the big long-term goal of being a self-sufficient portrait artist.
Great, thank you, Ellen. Any other comments from the rest of the panel?
I liked how, and I think this is connected to the comments that Eric made, that the community that's engaged will increase with each succeeding stage in the project's timeline, and the decision to seek feedback will be used to inform their future artistic endeavors. So that connection was a real positive for me.
Building upon that, I really loved that this application with that one-on-one community engagement with the subjects of the paintings is a great example of how that type of community engagement leads to building your audience. Because now at the time of the exhibition, you have a built-in audience already before you do any marketing of the event by the friends and family of those subjects.
Great. Anything else? Great feedback. Thank you. All right. Well, we will move on to the next application, which is Brian Hitzelberger. Sorry, Brian, if I did not pronounce your last name correctly. And our first reader is Ellen.
All right, back on it. So Brian is an arts educator. I'm also an arts educator, and in his application, when he talked about inspiring students and other artists with this book on creative block, like I completely understood the importance of this goal. He wants the project to inspire others in their own creative journeys, and it was also stated that the artist is new to the area and wants to make new connections here in Indiana. The fact that a book format is reproducible and can be in multiple places at once are also very good points when the goal is to expand one's audience, especially being in a new geographic area. Moving on to feasibility. It looks like the artist has put together a book before, so I'll trust that the budget numbers are accurate. It seems to me like everything is covered and the estimates have been utilized, which is great that there are estimates there. For the in-kind section, it looks like the artist is stating 100 billable hours at $20 an hour will be spent by themselves for a total of $2,000. I'm just questioning that because I was under the impression that in-kind is for contributions to the project by someone other than the applicant. So I'm wondering if this would go under a different category. Of course, it should be listed somewhere, but it was just a question about the in-kind placement. The project timeline seemed realistic. The writing's occurring now, so in 2022, it'll be ready for printing, assembly, promoting, the exhibiting, all of that stuff. I'm wondering, as far as reaching out to independent booksellers in Indiana, I saw that the artist had listed they want to maybe reach out in July or August of next year. The book's going to be ready to go in May. I'm kind of thinking maybe get the word out to the sellers in May or even sooner before the book is even published. I think the earlier you establish a business contact, the faster things can really take off for you. Maybe use that previous book that you've got published as an introduction to these independent bookstore sellers. I love the idea of a regional book fair to expand distribution and the audience, and it made me think of this amazing annual book festival in Chicago called the Printers Row Book Fest. I put the website in my comments. They usually have that going on the beginning of June. This year they did it in September, so I'm not sure what the difference was with 2021 and what they've got going for 2022, but the Printers Row Lit Fest is just south of downtown Chicago, definitely something if you're looking to promote your project, your book. As far as community engagement goes, I can see that happening with interviews and conversations that the artists will have with other artists in order to create this book. Sharing the lessons of these conversations with the public will engage even more people. I'm wondering, though, how will you get feedback from readers about how your book on creative block helped them? I know one of your goals was you wanted to be part of the larger conversation on that. So maybe some surveys in there will definitely open up that two-way communication and get the ball rolling on being a part of the larger conversation.
Wow, great. Thank you, Ellen. Jenny?
Ellen hit a lot of great points. I agree. I'm going to go a little out of order. With community engagement, I loved the consideration of interviewing other artists from the start to get that development into the creation of the work, and then focusing on engaging the community in readings and events later on. So you factored in that community engagement into two major parts. One discrepancy that I noticed, and it's probably not a big deal, just in how it's worded. There's a lot of the project itself mentions the creation of the book, which to me as a graphic designer, I think about the creation as the writing and the design and the layout versus the publication and distribution as the printing and distributing it. And from what I understood as I read it, the creation is actually happening this year before the project timeline begins in 2022. So it may just mean rephrasing what you say the project is, to say that I have this already created and the project goal is to publish and distribute and engage with the community for the pieces, or altering your timeline so that the creation happens in the year if you're going to say you're going to create the piece. Just ways to phrase that. And going again off of some of Ellen's comments with the budget, I also agree. It's my understanding that the payment for yourself would not be an in-kind contribution, but also because your expenses are substantially lower than your potential income, that payment for yourself could easily go into your expenses category to help make your income and expenses equal for the requirements of these grants. And that's all.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Any other comments from the rest of the panel?
I just wanted to thank Brian for including samples that immediately gave me a sense of who he was as an artist, and particularly the last one, which directly tied into what he would be creating for this project in a way that I could visualize what that was. So I just wanted to say thanks for that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Other comments? All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to Cortland, Waters, Bartley. And our first reader is Holly.
Okay. Well, this applicant is a calligraphy and hand lettering artist. And I really found that the creative work that she included in her application really gave us a tremendous glimpse into her amazing talent and into her creative mind and what inspires her as this person as an artist. And I also think that in her application, the goals are very clearly expressed and, established. And one thing that I would suggest is that she's going to be the first artist in residence for the Root artist residency. And I would have just liked to have known maybe a few more sentences about that program, just to give more of an idea of what it's about and what you'll be doing there, maybe one or two more sentences, so I could get more of an idea of how that really will help you both profession, in the business of being an artist as well as creatively, how it will help take your work and your career to the next level. And I'd also like to know a little bit more about what you referred to as the demonstration installation that you plan to be doing during the project. It sounds very interesting, and it's definitely something that I think will engage the public, and, but I just would like to know a little bit more about it and what you're going to be doing with that. Just again, a couple more sentences, but these are just very small details, because otherwise it's a very strong, in my opinion, very strong application. And I think that the timeline and the budget are very clearly thought out, well detailed. You can tell that she paid attention to, how long each of the steps in the process will be during every phase of the project. So it made the project, for me as a someone reviewing it seems very doable, and it's and it'll definitely be a tremendous benefit to the community. And I think I just feel it's a very strong application, and just a few more details about the root residency and the demonstration installation would make it even better. But that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Great, thank you, Holly Ann. Kristen.
Yes, thank you, Holly Ann. I am in alignment and agreement with all of your comments so far. One question that I had around the goals of the project was just, if I was understanding correctly, part of how the services that this artist is offering will be more accessible for the community is through an actual discounted rate of services. And I was just hoping to see that called out a little bit more clearly in the project goal summary. And then similar to Holly Ann, I was also curious about that artist in residence position, if there was going to be any kind of payment, or if outside of the space contribution from the root, if there was an additional payment, and if so, that should be included in the income as part of the feasibility section. I did also have one question about there seemed to be a slight discrepancy just from my understanding of how the hourly rate for expenses versus the set fee for lettering jobs were actually in alignment. So if, maybe just expounding upon that a touch more. And then, yeah, I think the services that this artist will be offering the community by way of offering those discounted services will be really helpful for engaging with the community. One thought I had also for just being able to interact with the community a little bit more was utilizing that residency time to have maybe open studios or different workshop components where people can come through and really experience the work that this person is doing for the community.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Other comments from any other panelists?
Yeah, I thought I'd add, as someone who previously owned a business in one of the downtown areas that they're talking about in Jeffersonville, I think it's great that you've highlighted focusing on like the downtown events that happen in Jeffersonville and New Albany, because that is a built-in way that the business owners can see the return on investment for your work, versus a very challenging thing of just going out, cold calls, in the middle of the year with no event or tie back. So just wanted to call that out, that was really great strategic thinking of how to tie existing events into your services.
Wonderful. Anything else? Okay, great. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move to the next application, which is Jamie Y. Young Irvin. And our first reader is Jenny.
Yes. So this project had a lot of components. And my first comment with the goals might be that there might have been too much listed for me to really understand the clear goals of this project, because it discussed, I believe, both things that would be included in the project and things that would happen soon after, but not in the project year. And they were talked about very fluidly back and forth together. So I had to make a few assumptions on what was actually included in the grant year. But beyond that, the timeline and the feasibility, I think, seemed really well considered. And the applicant is already talking with other artists from school and community to help collaborate on sculptures. The budget includes a researched quote of printing the zine, and the time invested by other artists is considered in there as well, but should maybe be listed as an in-kind contribution. You talk about the other artists donating their time, but not putting that into the budget as a line item for an in-kind contribution. And if you don't know an exact amount of what they would charge if their students also, you can come up with a reasonable hourly rate that you would want to pay yourself for your time, and talk to those artists about what that contribution would be. For the community engagement section, the applicant will be using the project to engage with many segments of the community. They talk about meeting with community leaders and mental health advocates for the creation and of the zine, but also displaying the sculptural display mechanisms for these printed pieces in public places. Some of them were public parks, some of them seemed like they were maybe mental health facilities. So good interaction both in the creation of the work and the display of the work. A comment that I would have for that is thinking about, once you put these sculptures into the world, how can you gain feedback from them? Are you there observing how people interact with them? Do you have calls to action printed on the back page of your booklets so that there's ways for the public to interact with you over social media or a survey? So I think there's a lot of potential there in two-way community engagement rather than just placing your piece in the community to be viewed.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Our second reader is Michael.
Yeah, I agree with almost all of Jenny's comments, and I certainly agree with her last comments in terms of there's a lot of effort that's put into describing what will happen in terms of the voices that are brought into the process before the project happens. There's very little that's put into the planning in terms of how we find out after the fact how successful things were, what the grasp was, what the reach was, and that those would be helpful tools to have as well. I agreed with her that the goals for the project were that they seamlessly seem to meld with the artist's desire for what their long-term future is. Perhaps it's because of my bias as a theater person. I actually liked seeing those pieces that came after the project, although I do understand that it made it the tiniest bit harder to wade through the project. But again, the artist here, their long-term goal is to have some sort of tangible and lasting impact in the computer as a theater artist, in addition to all of the multimedia things that they're doing. So for me, it was helpful to be able to see what they were thinking of step by step as they're going through their process. I, again, do understand Jenny's comments about it making the actual scope of the project just a little bit more challenging. The only other thing that I had was a really little thing in the, let's see if I can make this work here. I am looking at 2 laptops right now. In the feasibility stage, I agreed that the timeline was well conceived and very doable. For the purposes just of people like me who are reading the application, I think a vertical list of the key dates and actions is easier to pull essential information out of than submerging those dates into a body of paragraphs, but it's all there. Again, it's just, you're always trying to make grant raters, you're trying to make their job as easy as you possibly can because they may be rewarding you then with grants. So a vertical list just might have been a little easier for us to deal with there. And then I had one question, and I know this is after the scope of the actual project grant, but will you be able to charge for the theater performance if you need additional funds to recoup any unexpected expenditures? If you're going to include information that is outside the project scope, you could provide even the tiniest bit more information then to make sure that there's maybe another financial route for you as well, even though that wouldn't have been put into your budget or your income and your expenses, it would have been put somewhere in your narrative. So again, I thought this was a really exciting project, one of the ones that I'm really looking forward to seeing come to fruition. And so that, again, I thank you, Jenny, for all the things you said that I would have said if you hadn't. Good project.
Oh, that's funny. Other comments from the panel? Yeah, it's pretty thorough. Ailey, did you need something?
I just, in looking through everybody's applications or all your reviews, I put a note in my list saying, does this go far enough to explain how we're going to bring awareness to mental health issues? Did anybody want to dwell on that more, or do you feel like we covered that adequately by saying, just how are you going to get feedback from this when it's out in the world?
Yeah, I think that feedback on that would be adequate.
Okay. Well, we will move on to the next application, which is John Hickerson. And our first reader is Kristen.
Thank you. I want to say first off, great job to this artist for showcasing their creative work and really describing how this equipment will help level up their business. I think it was clear that you have a goal for where you want to get with your work, and that this funding will allow you to will support you in reaching that goal. I had some comments around really needing a little bit more detail about how exactly this equipment will, what it will mean for your business. So really digging into, how will having this equipment allow you to eventually reach the role of executive producer, which is your long-term creative goal. Also, are there some specific projects that you plan to create utilizing this equipment that you can show off at the end of the fellowship period to share with the community how this equipment has really just enabled you to move further in your career? Would really love to see you dive into how you'll use the equipment. And then as far as timeline and feasibility, I think some additional details are really required here as well to see when and how you will begin to implement the project. So that would include things like the timing for purchasing, the timing for when you will initiate relationships with a branding and marketing professional, really talking through timing for what tangible products will be produced with this equipment. So it's clear that you need it, but again, I think we need to just see a little bit more about what it does for you and in detail how you plan to utilize it. Again, going back to your creative work, it's obvious that there is a need for the work that you're doing. And so I think we just really want to know, again, what exactly do you hope to do with this new equipment? And then as far as community engagement, I did love the idea of creating a video for others interested in video production. I think, that it makes it clear that having this equipment will allow you to build your platform. And so offering others some understanding around what that looks like for you and how this enabled you to move further. I think that video that you create could also be part of your bigger project. So then just folding back into the initial project summary, showcasing your equipment and how you were able to use that. So that could even be a piece of just one of the details around what you do with the equipment.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Holly-Ann?
I agree with Kristen on everything that she just said. One of the things that I noted about this application is that it's very strong in terms of the details about the project and what he plans to do, with the laptop and equipment. But I would like to have seen more emphasis on the artist behind the project, like what inspires you, what got you started, and just give us more of a creative glimpse, a glimpse into your creative mind. And then that could also help us get more of an idea of what kinds of videos and things that you plan to produce with the new equipment. And I agree with what was said about feasibility. I mean, I think there needs to be, maybe a little bit more detail in terms of the project timeline. That would have been helpful. But those were the two key points. Just learning more about the artists behind the project would have been helpful.
Great, thank you, Holly-Ann. Any other comments from the rest of the panel?
I have a little bit to add. As a graphic designer, I've actually been thrown into video editing since the pandemic hit. So I know that there's an immense need for this. So this is great timing for having that. One concern I had with the budget and feasibility is just looking at, there was budgeted $1,000 for a laptop. And you've probably done your research on this, but make sure that if you're buying equipment to take your business into the next several years, that piece of equipment is going to be able to handle all the video editing software. Because that $1,000 sounds a little low for me for a machine to really handle all the processing that you'll do with video. And I also really loved the community engagement aspect of creating a video highlighting taking your business to the next level. But one suggestion I had is, instead of maybe you being the subject on that video the whole time, perhaps you work with your cohort from OnRamp or other local businesses, and you maybe highlight top 10 suggestions from 10 different artists, and you're able to feature your videography skills. Maybe some of them are using your drones, using different things to highlight that. And it might also create a more engaging video. So thinking about how you can engage more of the community in the creation of it, as well as viewing the video once it's done.
Great feedback. Anything else? Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll move on to the next application, which is Julia Youngblood, and our first reader is Michael.
I thought that the narrative for the harmonizing arts process itself and the intended outcomes of the fellowship project were well chosen and really clearly explained. I did have a question just concerning the scope of the project. Since there'll only be 5 participants that are actually going through the empowering spiritual workshop, it might fill up really quickly. It's, if somebody offered this workshop to me, I would want to sign up really quickly for that workshop. And since one of the business model outcomes is to, expand your business's grasp, I just wondered, after the first day and 5 people sign up, what do you do then in order to make that model happen where you're expanding the business grasp? As far as the feasibility section was concerned, I would have appreciated perhaps a few more specifics on the online store and the merchandise being purchased, just to provide some additional clarity to that budget item. And in my case, it also would have helped then dismiss any confusion as to whether or not that's a business operating expense, which I concluded it wasn't, but it did leave me with that question, at least initially. I thought the rest of the timeline was well constructed and the budget requests were justifiable. I did wonder whether or not you're making any additional income through registration fees or selling items from the online store that are linked to the event, just to give us a clearer picture of what all the numbers are. And then in terms of community engagement, it's clear that the artist has spent a significant period of time reflecting on how this entire process does affect people and how it'll affect the people that are chosen for the workshop. They even mention feedback during their timeline, just as a one-word statement that says feedback, but there's nothing that shares specifically what that means. I mean, it does imply that the participants and maybe some others will share their thoughts perhaps after the project's completion. And that certainly would give you a stronger sense of community input and agency for future incarnations of the work. But I wondered if there was anything that was happening, prior to those moments, and exactly what this feedback was. And if you could just be a little more specific, because it would help us understand specifically what it is that you're going to do in order to make sure that the community is engaged. Those were my thoughts.
Thank you, Michael. Second reader is Jenny.
Michael set me up to just build off of a few points because I agree with everything he said. Speaking about, well, the workshop will create undoubtedly deep and meaningful connections with that small number, 5 participants. And I love the second day approach that's going to be a little bit more individualistic to each participant versus talking to the whole group. But with that, how can you make that event with 5 individuals continue to engage with the community after? How can you make it have a lasting impression on your business development? And I'm sure there's many, many ways to do that. A few that came to my mind is this would likely be an added expense or an in-kind expense of having a local photographer come and take pictures of the event that you could then use in your marketing. One caveat, I would add a little disclaimer, especially since the event is free, that by participating in the event, you're allowing your photo to be taken that could be used in marketing purposes later. And Michael touched on this as well. Because it's a free event, is it first come, first serve? And then, within your first day, 5 spots are filled up? Or could it be maybe like a lottery system where you also collect email addresses and contact information for the people that are interested, and now you're building contacts to have later, and things that as when your event is over, you now have an audience of maybe 100 people that you have contact information for to share when your next event happen. And we know that that's important as Facebook and Instagram shut down recently. We all need our individual contacts for people. But again, timeline and everything seems well thought out. Just think about how you can make that 5-person event grow and continue to help your business and your community engagement later.
There will be painting and writing experiences done by the 5 participants. Again, I don't know that if it's of such a personal nature that it wouldn't be able to be shown or exhibited in some way, but that might also be a possibility, Jenny, as well, in terms of some additional publicity that's generated by this event.
Absolutely.
Any other comments from the rest of the panel?
I did have one thought, just around as you're building out your e-commerce, whether that's on your website or Etsy or wherever you're planning to share, because the offerings that you have are so diverse in nature, I think it might be interesting to offer to build out individual and group packages for some of the work that you're doing, just so that different, if there's an element that some person is really interested in and maybe they're like curious and want to explore something else, if there's a package that sort of offers a discount in one thing or in both things, that might be a helpful way to build out some of your just the commerce function.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. We'll move on to the next application, which is Catherine Marie Magowski, and the first reader is Eric.
All right. So the goals of this project are very clear to me, and based off of your writing, I have a very good sense of how installing an electric kiln in your home studio is going to assist with both your creative goals and your business goals. It's very clear to me, so congratulations on that. In terms of the feasibility, it seems feasible to me. In terms of the timeline, I thought of my dad, who is an electrical engineer, and got just a little bit of joy from the details in your budget. Like, I very thoroughly appreciated, it's clear you've done your research, you know how much this is going to cost. And when I think about that and how important this electric kiln is going to be for your creative work and your business work, like, it's very clear that you're being intentional here. I think that the income side on the budget needs a little bit more detail. I have a little bit of confusion right now when I look at the line item projected cash income. And I think in the narrative you mention there's a couple shows that you're planning to do, and you're expecting around 1,000 for each show. Yet you also indicate that you're not sure how much sales you're going to make based off of the ceramics that you're creating, and I totally understand the uncertainty in that you know, you need this new kiln to make the pieces, and before they're made, you know, it's hard to project what the income is going to be. I personally would like that projected cash income line item broken down by anticipating this amount of income from this show, this amount of income from this show, and anticipating this amount of income from selling X number of pieces. I think as it is right now, it's slightly up in the air, which gives me some hesitation. That being said, I know that when you have this new piece of equipment, it's really going to help with your business. I would feel much more secure in this application if that broad cash income was broken down with two or three line items. And then with the community engagement, I just want to draw attention to, I really, really like how you're partnering with organizations whose mission is to serve the community. And this is a great example of using your creative practice to generate work that partners with and serves programming that already exists. And I think it's, especially as an independent or an individual artist, when we see community engagement, we can get in the mindset of, I need to take on the world and change the world all by myself right now. And this is a great example of using what you do to work with people who are serving the community already. So I was a big fan of that. And that is what I have to say about this application.
Great, thank you, Eric. Our second reader is Kristen.
Yes, thanks, Eric. I absolutely agree with a lot of your comments. I did want to add that in the goals, I do think honing in on that, having a dedicated space to focus on increasing my skills for sets and larger quantities would be really helpful, just to really dig into how the specific project, just allowing you to be able to create a lot more. And that feeds into feasibility. And Eric, I know you were talking about this as well, but expanding on number 9 in your timeline is make clay products. I think it'd be great to say this many clay products is how many I plan to create because I have this kiln. I also think it might be helpful to dig into how parts 1 through 9, the way that you've set those up in your timeline, how the true timeline, once those pieces come together. I think it'll just be helpful for you to really have set up, you know, exactly when different things will be happening. And yeah, so once the grant is deposited and the kiln delivered, you know, what do the timeline pieces really look like after that's happened? Let's see, and then also mentioning size and style will impact timing of the actual clay product. But I think, again, to set yourself up for success, it would be helpful to have a really tangible goal at the beginning of project kickoff. For community engagement, I did have one thought. You had so many great ideas, but again, I think if you can kind of select one at the beginning, I think that will just enable you to have a lot more clarity as you're moving through the year with that funding and with the timeline of your project. So.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Anybody else have anything else to add? All about
I was just gonna quickly suggest to the applicant that, you know, after you've created the pieces that you plan to create during the project timeline, you know, using this kiln, to have your work professionally photographed by a photographer who specializes in photographing fine craft art, because you know, and it's expensive, and you know, you might be tempted to just figure you can take the short route, you know, the easy route and just photograph it yourself, but the expense that you invest in it, it more than pays for itself in the end, in terms of, from a marketing perspective, as well as just, showcasing your work to send it to galleries and museums and museum gift shops, and for fine craft shows if you choose to go that route. So.
I've noticed there's a number of people in the on-ramp program who collaborate with each other on projects, and there are photographers as part of the on-ramp program this year, and they may not be at the level of their careers that you're referring to, Holly, but it is exciting seeing all of these folks who were brought together, talking with each other and figuring out what their skill sets are. And so maybe there's somebody on the on-ramp program that would be really helpful for this particular program, this project.
Yeah.
One more bit of clarification from me. Again, in my notes, I had I felt like a couple of you touched on whether or not this project really goes far enough to explain how she can bring more awareness to human trafficking. Do you think that's strong enough in here, or will some of the other community engagement issues address that, do you think?
It seems to me that was a long-term sort of goal, and I did make a note that it was not clear to me how this project would impact that. So I would recommend either acknowledging that that's a later, sort of a later in life thing, and that this project is not going to do that, or adding language about, because I know it was in the application of connecting with businesses who are helping in that field. And so I think some more intentional language about that would make it clear to me how this project serves that particular long-term goal. But there was more than one long-term goal in there as well. So I'm not sure if this is a expand on that specifically, or if it's a take it out of this application and address it, later in a different.
Or explain it clearly as, although this particular project won't directly align with this long-term artistic creative goal, it is part of why I'm an artist and what I hope to ultimately do at some point in my life.
And luckily we'll have a recording, so they'll be able to use that language. Great. Well, friends, we have been on the meeting for almost an hour and a half. So I think it's probably a good idea for us to go ahead and take a quick break. And let's go ahead and come back online at exactly 11:30. So that'll give us about 7 minutes. And I will meet you back here in just a bit. And do be clear that when we come back and chat, we're still live. Looks like we're almost all here. This is great. And it looks like we probably won't be able to finish this panel before I need to run to another panel. So Chapin will end up facilitating the rest of it, which is, she'll be great. Okay, great. So we are ready to continue, and our next applicant is Chris Lasher, and our first reader is Ellen.
All right, so this project, the artist was going to, or is going to, record a compilation of music, specifically lullabies for adults. I think the artist did a really nice job describing the progression of project goal and how this project could help with the bigger creative business goals they want to achieve. In the goals write-up, I could clearly see what the artist will learn during this Lullabies for Adults project and the art installation project. I could also see how the learning points are a building block for more music creation, and then the possible retreat style offerings that they talked about as being more of a long-term or afterwards goal with this grant. Moving on to feasibility, the project timeline looked realistic. Reading through this grant, it seemed like this was a two-tiered art project. The funding is going towards the music creation of the CD itself, as well as an art installation project to take place next fall. I'm not sure, I did have a question. I wasn't sure what all was going into the installation. It sounds really, really peaceful. And I kind of pictured, or I kind of questioned if $150 would be enough for all of the materials in this, as I'm picturing it, this immersive, comfortable, calming experience. So that was just one question I had there about the budget, if that was going to suffice to kind of create that experience. Community engagement. The artist mentioned other artists who will both help with the music project and then artists who will be part of the installation project. Definitely those people will benefit creatively and financially from being a part of this. The patrons too to the installation and people listening to the lullabies will also have opportunities to give feedback and connect with the artist. So that was good on the community engagement component. Definitely these relationships will help the artist reach further goals. So 2 thumbs up.
Great. And our next panelist is Eric.
Yeah, I've just got a couple things to add. Firstly, in the feasibility, being in the industry as well, the studio time line item seems low to me. I'm not going to get too hung up on it though, because there's a solid chance you have a connection that I'm not aware of. But I sort of bring that up in that I echo Ellen's sentiment that I think the expenses might not be as accurate as they could be. And the other thing I'd really like to note is that I don't see in your expenses where musicians are being paid to record. And I think you should include your own time for the hours you're going to invest in this project and what you would charge for your services. And I think that you should represent the fee for your collaborators as well. And so I bring all that up to say that that might affect the expenses significantly. Significantly enough that you might consider reworking the scope of the album in terms of the number of tracks on it. I think that you could still, like if you're adding in paying the recording artists, you could still make 3 tracks, and you could still have this event. You could still connect with the community in that way by bringing these lullabies to people, but it will be a bit more feasible in terms of the budget. And I say all that to say that I would like for you to make sure that this is going to be what you want artistically, and that is going to require some additional expenses. At least I think it's going to. And then in terms of the community engagement, I would have liked more detailed language on the who of this. So the who of the audience is descriptors for me, to help me understand the kind of person that's going to attend and how it's going to impact them. I get that giving a performance is very, very meaningful and can change someone's life. I understand that very well. I would have just liked a bit more detail on who you're hoping to connect with.
When I was reading it, I got the impression that anybody who was suffering from stress during this incredibly traumatic time was their intended audience. And so I certainly could be one of those people, as many of us probably could be. I did have just a real quick question or two. I thought that the description of the sanctuary event may not have been complete, but it was compelling. It was something that again, the theatrical sort of thing that I would probably enjoy going to. The narrative said that the lullabies were going to be a focus of the sanctuary event, and I could have used a little additional information just to explain how or why. I didn't understand how that all tied in. And I know this might not be a real significant thing. As far as the creative sample of their work that was included for this project, it gave me a beginning snapshot of who the artist was and what they might be creating, but there was only one. And since there's going to be a range of lullabies, it would have helped me a little bit artistically to know more what the range of lullaby experiences might have been, and if there were other things other than the simple but effective piece that they did include as far as that was concerned. And then again, in terms of in the feasibility section, I just always find it as a reader a lot easier to read any information, key dates or budget items or whatever that are in a vertical list rather than are kind of smushed into a bunch of paragraphs. It was all there, at least what I needed to see, but it's just a little harder to read. And your grant reviewers are always reading a number of different grants at the same time. So, and you always want us to remember you with a smile on our faces. So anything you can do to make it a little easier for us to absorb information, it's good for us. It's also a good idea for you. Again, it was all there.
Great. Thank you, Michael, everyone. Great feedback. Anything else? I think you got it mostly covered. So wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next applicant is Madeline Copperweight, and our first reader is Holly Ann. And then when Holly Ann's done, Kristen, if you want to go ahead and just directly chime in, that'd be great.
Okay. This graphic design project, the applicant really explained branding and its importance in her work, and how and also emphasizes how much this project will help her from a business standpoint. Again, I mean, I may be repetitive when I say this, but just in terms of grant applications, for the future, but really give us more of a glimpse into your creative mind, and just a little bit more about your creative process and what got you started and what inspires you. That would be helpful, and give us more of an idea of who you are. And I think that was one thing I wanted to point out. As far as the budget timeline, it seems that the project begins in 2021, and there's a little bit of more detail about what you plan to do the last couple of months of this year as far as preparing for this project. And I think there should be a little bit more detail in terms of a breakdown of what, each of the steps you're going to be doing during the actual project during January through December of 2022. It looks like you're going to be doing you plan to do 7 projects. How long are they going to take approximately? Just give us a rough idea. Will you be working on multiple projects simultaneously, or will you be doing them one at a time? And, it'll be 1 month, 2 months, just give us more of a glimpse of how much time each one will take, because it's always better to err on the side of more detail than less detail, because the more detailed you put in your application, the more likely that you'll have success in your project, because you'll have a better idea when if your project actually starts, you'll have a better idea of what, yes, this is what I'm going to need. This is what I'm going to take. The same thing goes with your budget breakdown. There are specifics that you put in there, and you do go into detail about how much the Adobe software is going to cost. But I think if you do a little more research in terms of how much it will cost for you to build and maintain your website, go in. Are you going to be using Wix, or are you going to be using GoDaddy? I mean, yes, you're going to use GoDaddy to buy the domain name, but are they going to be your web hosting company, or Yahoo Small Business, or, those companies charge monthly fees, if you have more details in terms of how much each one of these things will cost, then your project becomes more realistic and you have a much stronger chance of success, and you're more likely to succeed if you just more is better, so just for the budget and the timeline, just be a little bit more detailed. Those are my main suggestions.
Thanks, Holly-Ann. I just want to say great job showcasing your creative work and describing your project summary. I think it makes a lot of sense that your interaction with the community, developing brands for businesses in the community, makes this project by nature a community engagement project. I also wanted to add that on timeline, I think it might be helpful to consolidate your brand creation timeline and end that in November, just so you have a month to really do that final presentation where you're bringing in everything that you've done over the course of the year for your project. I know you mentioned a final presentation is something that you want to include. So if you can, sort of bring the brand creation in a little bit, that'll give you some time to really develop that final presentation. Yeah, that's all I've got.
I have one little note to add, and this could be more long-term advice rather than specifically related to the project timeline. But as a fellow graphic designer, $300 per branding package is a really phenomenally great price. If it was just a logo, that's maybe more on par, but since you're also creating branding guidelines, which entails a lot, and you're giving them everything that they need to go on without you after this, because you're giving them that whole package, that's a really great price. It might be a stepping stone that you need it that way for this project to get out there, but there could also be opportunity to increase that price a little bit, which also means that in your budget, you don't have to contribute as much of your own funds for this project. If you charged $400 per package, that could, make your budget even out with less expense for yourself. But certainly in the long run, I know I had professors before that told me a big job of an artist is actually explaining to the community why we charge what we charge. So if you charge $300 for a whole package, you're also kind of undercutting other designers in your area that are at the level that you want to be seen at. So just consider that as you move forward. May or may not be a change you make to this project, but certainly as you go beyond the project.
And then I'll be interested to see how you utilize the 7 very, very happy businesses that you are doing such a inexpensive job of helping them come up with their brand, how you're going to utilize them in order to attract a tremendous number of new clients in the future, because they're all going to be so incredibly excited about the work that you've done for them at such a low cost. There was a little bit of that in the application. I could have used even more.
Great. Thank you. Well, we'll move on to our next application, and which is Mr. Goblin, otherwise known as Samuel Rosenberg. So I feel like this is so timely. And our first reader is Jenny, and our second reader is Eric. Jenny, you're muted, girl.
Okay, sorry, I collapsed my screen and couldn't find the button. Okay, I'm here now. And my first note on this project is just an assumption that I'm making, because I think there was a typo perhaps in the project dates. And it said the project started on January 1st of 2022 and ended on January 29th of 22. If those dates happen to be correct, I have some concerns about feasibility, but I kind of went into my discussion assuming that that was maybe December 29th. But leading in from that, the project goal is clear and measurable. They want to create an album or a body of musical work that's produced, and they'll know that it's done when the music is produced, and they can perform this music for the public. And it was easy to see how the project goal connected to the long-term goal of participating in and expanding the community that they love. I assume that's the music community, but maybe also the local community. They also have a long-term goal of having a financially stable creative practice in that. And I think this does tie into that as a stepping stone. But I'll get into feasibility a little bit. This does seem to be a break-even project, meaning that they don't appear to be paying themselves for the work. The income from sales and performances helps to offset some of the expenses. So I think this is probably a good stepping stone in that this one, they're maybe not paying themselves for their time, but by producing a great body of work that can be performed and shared, that could lead to more income where they're paying themselves later. But I don't remember that being addressed. So I think that could be pointed out, that paying yourself for your time as an artist is important. And this is, a stepping stone to get to that. So with the feasibility, the applicant does list the steps that they're going to take, working with other artists and recording and mixing. And you can tell I'm not a professional musician to remember all those words. And I do think that if they are using the full year, it is probably a reasonable time frame to get that completed. But it would be really helpful if that was outlined in a timeline. They list the steps, but don't say when they'll be happening, which also has me making assumptions about when the project period actually is. So again, I think that Michael has pointed out, just make it really easy for the reviewers to know exactly what your plans are. Because right now I think it's feasible, but I'm not really sure because I don't see it listed out. And some questions that I had about that timeline would include, is the music already created? And it's something that you're just working on recording? Or does this 1 year period include having to create the music and practice the music? Because that could, again, make it feel a little tight to get it all done. Likewise, I think you've talked about distribution of the music in some of your income and performances, but that's not outlined in the timeline either. So if that's part of your project income, which is great, performing the music, selling albums virtually and everything, make sure that you outline those performances in your timeline if that's part of the grant period. So just again, make it really clear how all those puzzle pieces fit together. And then for community engagement, I love the idea of reaching out to schools and speaking about being a local touring musician to inspire, the next age of musicians coming through, especially as a lot of school districts are cutting arts programming. That's a great way to make those connections with a working artist. That is another piece that could be included in your timeline of just saying, you know, towards the end of the year, maybe in November, before schools are out for winter break, is when you would reach out to those schools. And then also something that I saw in the narrative of your application, but I didn't see highlighted in community engagement section itself, was the community engagement that you're building by working through the creation of your work, by growing your network of other artists and musicians and your all of the partners that you're working with to produce this album. So that is growing your audience and getting feedback 2 ways likely throughout that process. So just being sure that you highlight that important part of your project in community engagement to highlight that interaction that you're having. Oh, and just lastly, just considering if there are more active ways to have 2-way interaction with the community during your performances or you're speaking with schools or other ways. What are ways that you can reach out to them to get feedback from those interactions? And that's all.
Cool. I've just got a couple things to add, and I just want to echo the sentiment that a timeline month by month or windows of time is very helpful, makes it much more clear to us. I also think, and Holly was talking about this earlier in a different application, I'm gonna sort of do the music version of let's add more detail to this to give it even more strength. I think writing some language about is this an EP, an LP, or a feature-length album would add strength. And I know that distribution is a ways off, but writing intentional language about who your distributor is going to be would also add strength. So are you looking at CD Baby, TuneCore, SongTrader? Which one of those are you looking at most closely? And I probably would request this studio, moving on to your budget. My brain's moving faster than my mouth today. I think additionally, in terms of the feasibility, I would just like a little bit of a breakdown on the musician fees and the studio engineer costs and the mixing fees. I love that all those are itemized because they are different processes that need to be allocated resources as such. I would probably just request like in parentheses, this number of hours at this rate for the mixing engineer. Studio charges this amount for this amount by this hour, and we're going to be in the studio for this, you know, amount of time. So is the studio charge $60 an hour and you're going to be there 12 hours? Or help me understand that. And then with the musician fees, as it is right now, I don't have a sense of, is this one musician being paid $500, 10 musicians being paid $50? So just a little bit of a breakdown on that. Are there going to be 6 performers, 4 performers? That would add more strength to this application and this overall plan. And then in terms of community engagement, I'm not going to add anything that Jenny didn't already say, except for this one idea that is related to her comment about the 2-way conversation and feedback. I did have a spark of an idea, and you don't have to take it. It's just something that would be great community engagement. But if it doesn't work for you artistically, then you don't have to do it. But as you're going to these workshops, is there an opportunity to record the students you're presenting to in some way and then integrate that into the album? Is there an opportunity for, and maybe not even musically, just you're talking to them and you're asking them to speak, or everyone cheers or something, and integrate, you know, that applause sounds into like the final track of your album or something? That might be an opportunity for you to connect with those students on a deeper level and help them literally tangibly shape the album itself with real sound.
Fascinating. Great. Thank you both. Any other comments? Pretty thorough. All right. Well, thank you, friends. It has you have a few more applications to review, but I have to go to another panel. What an incredible amount of feedback! Really great, fantastic feedback, and thank you. It's such a pleasure to see you all again. So I feel like I'm in a track meet in high school, and I'm handing the baton to Chapin. So Chapin, take it away. All right. Thanks all.
We missed you, Paige.
Thanks, Paige.
Bye.
Okay, I'm gonna close us out on our last four. I don't know if I'm going to do this name justice, but it's Shifin Liu. And we start with Kristen, and then when she's wrapped up, if Michael will chime in. Thank you.
Thanks, Chapin. So I just want to start off by saying that the project sounds like a great example of community engagement and support. It's clear that this is really important and personal for the artist. And so I think that just is going to allow for you to really take this somewhere really special. Inviting refugees to learn watercolor techniques and engaging them through memory to process trauma is just a really beautiful thing to be working through. I would love for you to expand a little bit more on your long-term creative career goals. I know that you shared a lot of important history about your creative journey so far, which was great to have that context. But I personally, after reading that section of your application, didn't feel clear about what your future goals were. So I would love for you to dig into that a little bit more. I know you mentioned it briefly, talking about additional shows and using this work as a theme to apply for calls, but it would be great to see that just really targeted in your long-term goals. And then there was one thing I noticed, I think this is truly just a small typo, but the end of your project date says 2021, so just updating that to say 2022. So just small typo there. And then as far as feasibility, again, it's really clear that you have sort of the philosophy for this project set in the two different components that you have, a part 1 and a part 2. But I think we're missing more of a detailed timeline piece. So if you could really expand on, what's going to be happening when, laying out some specific targets for what you'll be doing during different months throughout the year. Maybe that's in January, setting a workshop and exhibition dates with the center and with the Campus Center Cultural Gallery, et cetera. So those kinds of things. But again, for community engagement, you've done a really great job incorporating community into your project and engaging with the refugee community and supporting them emotionally and creatively. So I think it's going to be a beautiful project.
I agree with everything that Kristen said. I think it's an incredibly noble project and very excited for it. Couple of really little things. I love the fact that I teach people who want to be teachers. So the fact that you're using your workshops sort of as your student teaching semester through the 12 sessions and working to alleviate stage fright. And I read into that at least part of your long-term goals probably have something to do as being an artist educator, whatever format that takes, but the specificity of what that is certainly could have been fleshed out just a little bit more, as Kristen was saying. I did have questions about the timeline that Kristen referred to. I also thought was fuzzy, and I think taking her advice is probably going to make this easier for all of us to be able to understand exactly what you're doing and when you're doing it. I did, on the budget, there were two things that were listed at the beginning, the camera and the refugee training that didn't have any expense associated with them. So I sort of wondered why they were in the budget section. Perhaps they didn't need to be there, although they certainly could be in your narrative. And I just had a question. It feels like financially, the arts engagement community workshops that you're planning on doing are going to raise half of your projected income. I wondered if there had been any outreach into the community to find out whether or not those opportunities are going to exist at the level that you're hoping they're going to exist at. And for both of our sakes, we're hoping that they are. A little bit of information in your application, though, as to where you are in that process right now of starting those conversations or securing those spots would be helpful. And The only thing that I would add in terms of the community engagement feedback, because I agree with Kristen that the entire project is as close to it's completely dependent on community engagement, and you realize that, and you're doing all the things you need to do in order to make it happen with that piece of the puzzle. But I'd suggest adding maybe some ongoing and post-project surveys or other mechanisms for gathering feedback about both your successes and the areas that perhaps you need to grow a little bit in future endeavors. And that's all I had.
Excellent feedback to our readers. Do you have any additional comments from the rest of the panel? Okay, hearing none, we're moving on to Skye Studebaker Nicholson, starting with Michael this time and then ending with Holly-Ann.
Give me just a second. I need to find her. Here she is. Okay. I thought that as far as the goals were concerned, that they were clear. I appreciated that the applicant provided a range of sample poems which communicated their unique voice. And as I mentioned in my write-up, I'm a little personally obsessed now with the poem Elemental Alchemy. And I plan to use the last phrase, shenanigans of soul, sometime soon in everyday conversation, because I think that's a great phrase. I'm not sure entirely what it means yet. Maybe we'll talk to the panelists later to see what their feedback is there. I thought that their resulting artifact journal that they're going to create is directly aligned with their coaching career goals and their desire to expand their poetry reading audience, or people who will buy their poetry. The applicant's long-term desire to help women heal and look inward aligns well with the structure of the project and the features of the proposed journal. And then again, an extra positive, which I tried to note each time this happened, was that you're collaborating with other on-ramp fellows. It always makes me feel good when artists are brought together and they realize, oh, we could be helping each other. We don't live in a silo. We actually can connect. And timeline-wise, I thought it was realistic and sufficiently specific to understand your process. I thought the donated time and talent are very real and should be listed somewhere, but not as budget items. And that overall the project as proposed and explained, it seemed feasible. The artist has reflected clearly on who the project will have a positive effect on and prove meaningful to. The two women's circles will provide additional feedback as to the effectiveness of the journal at least that developmental stage, and it'll provide some external voices. And then the ultimate goals of the project, they all obviously have a tremendous potential for community impact. In fact, the more successful the project is, the more coaching opportunities and poetry awareness sales the applicant will receive, the more poetry and healing and bond the community will gain. It's felt like a real win-win. And those are my comments.
Okay, well, my goodness, like on the same wavelength, because I agree with, everything that you just said. You just pretty much took every point that I wrote down here. I mean, I think it's a very strong application and an exciting project. And I really, just really applaud this applicant, because I think that this project could appeal to a large group of people in the community who really don't know very much about poetry and don't know, don't even know if they would like poetry, or if really that's an art form that would really speak to them or really resonate with them. And I think it'll just do wonderful things in terms of empowering women, and spreading awareness of, female empowerment issues. And, I really don't have any, critical, suggestions or anything, because I think it's a really well done application, and, the detail in each, answer to every question is really strong. And, I wish this person tremendous success.
Excellent. Any other comments?
Shenanigans of soul.
Lock it in. Lock it in. Don't forget. That's great. Okay. No other comments. you know, you can update yours in the online system. And in the meantime, we'll move on to Taj Mullins, beginning with Eric and ending with Michael's comments.
Right. The goals of this project feel very clear to me. The only real point of feedback, I have a good sense of who you are, what you're doing artistically, and what you want to do with this project. So congrats on that. You do mention that you're wanting to sell 200 to 400 copies of your book to your targeted audience. And as a reader, I don't know who your targeted audience is. The way you write makes me believe that you know who the targeted audience is, but just as a way to give this additional strength, outlining that for the readers is a good idea for future applications. In terms of feasibility, I do think that it is feasible. I would request, as Michael has said several times now, I'd request a vertical timeline in this section. I'm missing details on when things are going to happen. The release date's there, that's cool. But I'd like, you know, what does the writing process look like? When do communications with illustrators start? And to have that outlined all very clearly, this month to this month. So I would really recommend making that timeline. And plot twist, when we outline the timeline very clearly for someone else's eyes, it also helps us manage our own time with our own projects. So I would recommend doing that as well. I think in the budget, I'd like more detail on I made a comment that I'd like more detail on the book printing, and all I mean by that is, can you tell me like number to price ratio? You mentioned in your narrative 200 to 400, but what is the cost per book? Does it vary if you buy 200 versus buying 400? I think that would help me have some more clarity. And as always, I think you should pay yourself. So please put what you would pay yourself in your budget. I think that's, it is missing in this, and I would really recommend having that. And even if this is, we've talked about this in previous applications today, even if this is one of those stepping stone projects where it positions you for future financial gain, it's always a good idea to outline what the cost of your work is, so that when you are positioned for future clients or future projects, you've got that number ready to go right then and there. And, you know, doing great work leads to more work. And so if you have that number of what you're going to earn, then the next time you can incrementally increase that number based on the scope of the future project. So that was a 2-minute way of saying, pay yourself, please, and put that in your budget. With the community engagement elements, I don't have a clear sense of, I like that you list all these organizations. They all seem cool. They probably all do great work. But I'm missing intentional language about how working with them is going to inform your project and impact the community, and also how you're going to communicate with the community. As it reads right now, it looks like you're going to rely on companies or organizations to give you feedback on the work. And yeah, I just want some intentional language about how connecting with these places is going to get you connected to your community, and how you will then additionally get feedback from the community. It's been mentioned before for other applications, but even surveys, you know, all of that, any way you can gather feedback on the work from the community is going to better inform how you can serve them, which also informs securing more work for yourself in the future. Because if you know what people want, then you can help provide that. That is all I got for now.
Tying into what Eric was just talking about, and I agree with all of his comments about this application, I do think that the artist understands the market for his work are parents that are looking to teach specific lessons to their children. So there is a clear link that's there. However, the comment that Eric was making about all of the businesses that have volunteered to sell copies of the book, those aren't the customers that the feedback really would be most helpful coming from. So in addition to whatever might be said from customers to those businesses or from businesses to the artist, if there's another mechanism for actually directly speaking to your customers as well, which I'm sure several other panelists on this panel would be able to address from their more business backgrounds, that's obviously going to make the feedback that you're getting more directly relevant to whether or not you're going to be able to continue to sell more and more copies of this Dr. Seussian sort of world that you're going to try to create with all of your works. I am a parent of 4 daughters, and yes, we did very specifically buy books that were intended, whether it was Berenstain Bears or whoever the brand might be, that were very specifically intended to teach certain lessons to our kids. So you do understand your market, and yes, it's a very, very large market if you can figure out directly how to tie into the things that market directly needs. I agreed that the goals made sense to me in terms of how they served his career goals, and let's see, feasibility. The area that I looked for more specifics on, and I think all of the comments that Eric made were spot on, but I wanted more on the marketing breakdown, the marketing expenditures. You made this a big part of your overall goal, and how it will build towards the next phase or whatever. There didn't feel to be enough specific numbers there, numbers in the budget part or timeline dates and key months or whatever in terms of the marketing expenditures. And I think that would have made your application even a little bit stronger. It is already strong. And then, yeah, I think that's all that I had. Eric covered the rest of it. And so good luck. It sounds like it's an exciting project. And at some point we'll be able to talk about you in the same capacity as the Dr. Seuss's and whoever of the world. And it'll be exciting that we knew you earlier in your career. So well done.
Thank you, Eric and Michael. Any other comments for Taj?
I have one comment to add. And it's mostly tying in to what our previous readers said. You list out organizations that you'll be working with, but they do seem to all be located in New Albany and Floyd County. But remember that you have neighboring counties right beside you that offer farmers markets. Jeffersonville has a story trail in the NOCO Arts and Cultural District where they highlight stories. A lot of times they're from children that get published, but it could be an opportunity to have your work in that story trail and do readings there. So look outside of your own county, look to those neighboring counties. And being in New Albany, even though this is Indiana Arts Commission, we have Louisville right there, great public library system there. If one of your goals is building your audience, then look to the areas that you can still get to easily, but grow exponentially your reach.
It is so helpful to have someone who has direct knowledge of the particular area on this panel.
Okay, anything else? Okay, if you could believe it, we are at our last applicant review for the day, and we do have our only conflict of interest. So we are going to place Miss Jenny in the virtual waiting room for a smidge. And in the meantime, we have Ellen beginning with these comments, and then followed by Holly-Ann.
Okay, so this money is going towards the training to lay the foundation for starting a creative reuse store. I thought that the goals were very clearly stated and connected, from the immediate project goal of going out to Portland to receive training for this creative reuse, the long-term creative business goal of using the business to bring different groups of people together to realize their creative potential and to be inspired to create. I thought the goal write-up was very well done. Feasibility, it seemed pretty straightforward to me. So this is for a 3-day training in the spring of 2022. So along with heading out to the Northwest, I thought all of the major expenses for a trip for training appeared to be listed. So the airfare, hotel, food, transportation costs, and training fees. So that was pretty cut and dry. And then for community engagement, I kind of went back and forth with what feedback to give the applicant about community engagement, because when I read through the application, there were just several amazing ways that they were going to use community engagement with bringing in disadvantaged youth and other abled people with a creative reuse. But then I kind of remembered, okay, this is specifically for the training. So when I thought about it that way, and the fact that the artist was going to include the Arts Alliance, the local Arts Alliance, to kind of get their viewpoints and feedbacks about community needs after the training, I think they were spot on then with the community engagement pieces. And I'm confident that all the other pieces on community engagement will come together later when that store is actually up and running. So good job with the write-up.
Okay, I agree with a lot of what has been said. You really get a sense of how passionate the applicant is about the phrase "everyone's an artist," and how she wants to use this store to and using repurposed materials to push that that creative business goal. I did not get really too much of a sense of her creative voice. There was not, I didn't find enough emphasis on her as an artist and what, why she chooses repurposed materials, what inspires her and why, and a little bit more creative evidence would have been helpful. Like instead of one example, it should be maybe a half dozen examples of your work, and you could also offer a description of your work. I use repurposed materials in my artwork, and it's very helpful to the viewers and the people seeing my artwork to know what it's made of. Put the materials, put the dimensions, but what it is. Is this a book? Is this a sketchbook? What is it? And also those details can give us more of an idea of who you are as an artist and the story behind you and this project. And I do see that you listed all of the in your budget, the travel details about going to Portland. I do think, again, be more detail, the better. So if you put the, $600 for a flight, round trip flight, well, if you, take that a step further and go to Travelocity.com or go to AmericanAirlines.com and put in the dates, the tentative dates. I think it looked like it was in February, were the travel dates. Put those in on the website, and you'll see a more accurate assessment of how much it will actually cost, because the round trip flight, is probably closer to $400 than it would be $600. And, that's a big difference. So ballpark estimates are really not the best thing when putting together a budget for a grant. More information, the better. 3 hotel nights for $500. You could just go on choicehotels.com or hotels.com and see how much it would actually cost. And it will just help you in the long run and make it more likely that your project will be successful. And just long-term, even for this project, as well as just for your future endeavors, I would suggest that you write an artist statement and really get to the bottom of who you are as an artist. And I think that it will be helpful for you when you apply to grants. If you ever apply for an Indiana Arts Commission regular fellowship grant, because the grant panel will want to know as much as possible about you as an artist and the story behind your work. And you need to have creative evidence as well as just an artist statement that gives us really more background about you. But those are my suggestions, and I definitely wish you tremendous success with your store. Because as somebody who uses repurposed materials, I am all for a store like that. So best of luck.
Excellent. Thank you, Ellen and Holly-Ann. Anything else to round out our discussion today?
And if she didn't take the approach that Holly just suggested, which would be a really wise approach, her resume is so full of art therapy credits that maybe then you just emphasize all of the art therapy work as being the core of what your creative artistic life is. And because I kept wondering what the Guatemala book was supposed to say to me too. As Holly mentioned, there wasn't anything explaining it. I didn't know exactly what the artist's contribution to it was, and there was only one piece rather than multiple pieces as Holly suggests. So if in fact there isn't as much personal creative output or artwork, then there needs to be something else that you have done, which she has. She has a tremendous art therapy background that you're championing instead as your journey as an artist, your journey as a creative person or whatever. And so that would have been another approach that possibly would have worked. It was a concern for myself as well, Holly, in terms of not having as much information as I wanted to have.
Okay, last call. Excellent. I'm going to let Jenny back in. And I want to say thank you to our amazing panelists and to any of the applicants who have been hanging around on YouTube or watch this and the recording in perpetuity. Hello. If I could have the panelists hang around for just a couple of minutes to get your feedback. But this does conclude the Floyd County cohort panel discussion for the 2021 On-Ramp Local Fellowship. And thanks again.